rename yourself for Zoom, your Zoom name, your profile.
How do I do that?
I think you go to settings in your Zoom.
Settings in my Zoom. Yeah, if I can find them.
It's got a little gear symbol.
Okay, all right.
When you first bring us in, it's okay. We know you are.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we are going to be talking about artifacts. I'll wait a few more minutes to see if a couple people come.
Yeah, we can definitely let everybody kind of pop in a little bit, but
Okay.
yeah, we can hang out. We can hang out for a minute or two more. That's all right.
All of you know John Manchester, correct?
Hey, John.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I recognize everybody, so from past trainings. But it's good to see everybody looking healthy and
Healthy and
well.
wise. Mm-hmm. At least healthy and wise.
Your hair is shorter than the last time I saw you.
Mine?
No, Sharon's. I think Sharon's hair is a little shorter than the last time.
Yeah.
Yes, well, those masks kept getting caught in the hair.
Yeah, it's a COVID cut. Yeah.
It's a COVID cut.
Okay, John, would it work last time I turned over the hosting to you? Would that work better for you?
I think that would work. That would probably work better.
Okay.
Just because it'll allow me to do everything I need to think.
Yeah. I'll do that. Then just look out for people trying to get in the waiting room there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on that. It'll pop up it was popping up on my screen yesterday, so I'll make sure that once it does, I'll let people in.
Okay, now you should be the host.
So I am going to share my screen here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Good. All right. So I'm going to start the actual slideshow itself.
We picked this theme for the training due to popular demand, and maybe a little more apropos to the things that we have to talk about in the park in terms of what we're trying to communicate.
I'll share real quick and share a different screen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I got to share a different screen here for a second because.
Okay.
But, all right. So do you guys see just a big screen all together? Or do you see one that says show taskbar, display settings, all that stuff?
I see interpreting archaeological resources.
This will be your first slide.
Okay, but there's nothing below it. It's just a slide. So, well, welcome. Glad you guys are all here. John, when he asked me to do another interpretive training, he asked me to do something maybe on the side of archaeological resources. Said that was something that some of y'all there at the park had been asking for. So here we go. So I got some more people popping in. Jenny and Harris just popped in. So, but you guys have a really good good site there with a lot of archaeology still to be done. I would say when you have a park that's called a 12,000 year history park, there's 12,000 years of history. You know,
What I
time to be.
only about since been excavated.
What was that, DC?
I said, from what I understand, only about 1% to 2% even been investigated are archaeologically excavated.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got a lot more still to be done. And when you say 1 to 2%, 98% takes a long time. So there's a lot to do, but you've already had so much done. That 1 to 2% has just been a wealth of knowledge to those of you who are interpreting that landscape. So just, as interpreters, we are connecting our audience to a tangible resource. We are connecting them to something. That can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a thing. But when it comes to a lot of historical topics, most of those things, we don't see them. And we're trying to connect the people to that resource. And we need knowledge of that resource. And so a lot of that is going to come from archaeological excavations. And in order to connect our audience to that resource, we've got to have some techniques that we can use. And archaeology does give us some really good techniques of in an interpretive program to connect the visitor to the resource. But like I said, when it comes to many of our tangibles, they're no longer physically visible or present today. So when you think of the tangible resources you have there at the 12,000 Year History Park, you've got things like Fort Congaree. The fort's not there anymore. It's gone. You can't see it. The remains are there. It's just they're not easily visible. You got the town of Saxe-Gotha. Those early colonial settlement houses, they're gone. You've got the camps or the village sites of the Native American people who were there. You don't see those anymore. They're not visible. The people themselves, those Paleo-Indian, archaic woodland Mississippian era peoples, they're not there physically present anymore. Now their ancestors, they are still present. One thing that just as I've learned about interpretation, especially of the Native peoples here in the Southeast, is that when you begin talking about like especially the major tribes, the Cherokee, the Catawba, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, all those major tribes, they are descendants of those earlier peoples. So those people are still here in a sense, but it's their ancestors. And so, but we don't see those original people in their original sense. The backcountry settlers, we don't see them. We can't really see how they were living and what their life ways were like in first person. Civil War soldiers, that was over 150 years ago, so they're not there anymore. So it begs the question, how do we connect our audience to a tangible resource that they cannot physically experience? They cannot see it, they cannot hear it, they cannot touch it, they can't, well, I hope they're not trying to taste it, but they cannot experience that tangible resource. And that's where we can use archaeology to connect our audience to the past. So that wasn't supposed to still be there, but I'm just gonna scroll through all these so you can see what that all means. Archaeology, just as a little quick overview, it is the study of past ways of life through the analysis of artifacts that are helping to show the relationship between both material objects used by past individuals and the behavior of those who left behind them. When we find an object, it gives us at least some information that allows us to extrapolate what the social and cultural behaviors of the people or person who left it behind was. Archaeology is a science. It is not just searching for artifacts that we can place in a museum that are really cool. So, sorry, Andy. We all have kind of the general public has this idea of an archaeologist being just like Indiana Jones. It's archaeology is an adventure. It's fun. There's danger and booby traps and all kinds of stuff lying around, but that's not archaeology. I mean, archaeology is a very long process. It is not just you figure out where a site is, you go out there for a couple weeks and you've got it all. When they've been excavating the site of Fort Congaree, they excavate a little bit at a time. They find just a little bit at a time. They're out there for a short period of time, and then they have to, cover it back up and then come back again to either continue on that section or another section. There are sites that have been archaeologically studied for years, and we still haven't found everything. One site in particular that I know of in South Carolina is the Topper site, which is down in Allendale County. It is a site of a former quarry of chert that was used for projectile points and other stone tools. And they have been studying that since 1984. That was when they first went in there. I was born in 1984. They've been in that site for 36 years, and they're still studying it. They're still going in there and finding new things that are revealing a lot about not just native people from, Paleo-Indian up, but they're finding stuff from Clovis and possibly pre-Clovis periods. So it's still being studied. It's a long process, and it's not always fun. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's buggy. And people don't always see that. They don't necessarily understand it. So as interpreters, we actually have a really good chance to help them understand what archaeology is and why we do it, why it's done. So the artifacts that are found during an archaeological excavation are very important. Because like I said, they reveal a lot of information about past people. And that's information that we as interpreters can actually pass on to our audience. If you remember past interpretive trainings, if you've been in them with me, you know that, in order to connect your audience to the resource, you have to have knowledge of that resource. You've got to know about it. And so archaeology is giving us that knowledge. Archaeology is going to, there we go. It's going to give us details. It's going to give us details about how a specific or a specific person or people group actually survived. So we have clues and can draw information about what they were doing that enabled them to make it day by day. It can reveal information about a group's religious beliefs. What were their beliefs? What were their practices? What deities did they revere? What were their, did they have like a holy site within a village, or was it something that went with them? We can learn a lot from archaeology about those life ways. We can see how their families were structured. We can learn about family structure. Were they a matrilineal society? Were they a patrilineal society? Was it one big, huge family group living together, or was it was a village made up of lots of different families that weren't necessarily related? We can see how their society was structured. What was their government essentially like? And we get to see how they develop over time. When you find sites that have, multiple eras of people groups who've been using it, like the 12,000 History Park, you actually see the development over time of people. You can see how, with, people who were in that Paleo-Indian era, they were hunter-gatherers. They only had, what they could carry with them. They weren't staying in one place, and they hadn't even developed pottery at that point. If they were using anything to carry something, they were using probably hides from the animals that they had killed. And then over time, you see them moving from that Paleo-Indian to Archaic, and you start seeing the development of pottery. And from Archaic to Woodland to Mississippian, you see how pottery changes, how it goes from being very, very thick and just utilitarian, not ornamented at all the way up to the very thin temper that you see with the Mississippian era and the highly decorative nature of it. So when you have a site that has a lot of history contained within it, you see that progression of time. And that's really important, and it's really helpful in helping the audience understand how did the native peoples of the Southeast that the first settlers met in the 15 and 1600s, how did they get to where they were at that point? We can see that through archaeology. So, and that will help us interpret that for our visitors. So there is a chance that maybe at some point you'll have archaeological work that's ongoing at your site. There may be an active dig going on, and that always does present opportunities, both good and bad. I don't know exactly how the 12,000 Year History Park will work with this when active digs are going on, but sometimes during an active excavation, that can be an opportunity to give visitors a glimpse of the real, true scientific nature of archaeology. There are parks out there that are active archaeology parks. One, right off the top of my head, here in South Carolina, you have Charlestown Landing. That's an active archaeological site. And people can go there and see archaeological digs going on. And the National Park Service, Jamestown, is an active archaeological site. I've been there a couple times, and the most recent excavation they've been doing is around the old church there. And when I went there both times, it was actively being excavated. There were archaeologists down there working on that site. So it gives people a glimpse of what archaeology truly is, gives them a picture of it. It's a great way to actually connect an audience to the tangible resources, because it's going to allow them to get a greater understanding of what goes into learning about the past, as well as giving them a glimpse of what historical looks like many, many years later. Because not every historic site is like a castle over in Europe, or some of the ancient temple sites over in Asia and India that are still there even 2,000-3,000 years later. Some of our sites here, they're not as visible, and you have to really search for them. And even after they've been found, it's still not going to be something that you really are going to see the original structure. You might be able to, use an archaeological site to reconstruct something. Some places will put up ghost structures, or they'll recreate the site on that archaeological site.
The site nearby where they found
you're never going to get a glimpse of what the original looked like. But we also, when we're interpreting archaeological sites, we have to remember that we also have a role in protecting those sites. Especially a place like the 12,000 Year History Park, where that site has only been archaeologically surveyed 1 to 2%. You still got 98% still needs to be surveyed. you want to make sure that stays as pristine as possible, because any kind of disturbance can completely destroy information that you need.
And what
So
temperatures I did.
as great as an opportunity it might be to show visitors, remember that you should only do it if there has been authorization given. You have to have permission to do it. If you've got a dig going on over there and
Maybe Thursday.
you're doing a walking tour and it's like, well, hey, let's go buy it. Let's go check it out. If the team doesn't know you're coming in, it could disturb them, and it could possibly mess the site up as well. So make sure you have the go-ahead to go and see an active archaeological dig. Get permission from people like John, and if he can't give permission, he can talk with the site, who the site supervisor is for that dig, who's the lead archaeologist on that, and that person will be the one to say, yeah, sure, or no, I think we need to have people stay out for a while. And then it's also necessary sometimes to actually keep certain locations confidential. While it would be a great opportunity, if people knew where that site was, it could lead to things happening that we don't want to happen. Constant access to a site, just by people going back to it, can actually degrade the integrity of that site. So it's possible that, people going back there all the time might actually not be a good thing for gathering future information. Certain sites also may be culturally sensitive, and people need to not be in those areas. We'll get into a little bit of this more later. But one example I know of, Greg Cunningham, who is at Congaree with me, he came to Congaree from a park in Hawaii that was the site of an ancient, I won't say ancient because it's not really that old. It's only from the 1700s really, but a temple called a heiau that was built by King Kamehameha as basically solidifying the islands under his control. Nobody goes up there. It is what they call kapu. It's taboo. You don't go up there, except if you are specifically given permission to do that. And there are sites here in the Southeast, especially as it relates to Native Americans, they are considered sacred sites. You just don't go in there unless you have been given permission to go in there. Or it's you are a part of that tribal group and you can go in there. So we want to make sure that people aren't traipsing around someplace that is culturally sensitive. And because all those artifacts are so important, we don't want them to be unearthed, especially if they become the target of looters or relic hunters. Especially when it comes to Native American artifacts, when it comes to Civil War relics, people want to go in and find them. They want to find those lithic points. They want to find pottery sherds. They want to find mini balls and shell fragments. They want to find those things, but if they take them home, we can't learn anything about them. And if we don't learn anything about them, the audience won't learn anything about them. So sometimes we need to make sure that we protect them for future understanding. Always know as an interpreter what your local, state, and federal laws are pertaining to the protection of archaeological sites. Reading law documents is never necessarily the most fun reading, but it is essential. So for example, here in South Carolina, we have 16-11-780 of the South Carolina Code that prohibits the entering of certain lands to discover, uncover, move, remove, or attempt to remove archaeological artifacts. So it's basically related to trespassing. You're not supposed to just go into some place to go look for something. If you know something happened in a certain spot, you're not just supposed to traipse in there to go find it. If you're working with an organization that is part of an initiative to do that, well, then you'll be allowed with permission to go into certain spots. But places like the Heritage Preserve and the 12,000 History Park, people shouldn't be going in there just to dig around and find mini bowls or lithic points. For us over in the on the federal government side, we have a couple different laws. We have one called the Archaeological Resources Protection Act of 1979. We'll call it ARPA. But this law was actually established to protect for the protection of archaeological resources and sites which are on public lands and Indian land. So there are heavy fines and jail sentences for anyone who goes into a national park like Congaree, for instance, who would try to go digging for Native American artifacts or something.
John,
Yes.
I'd like to mention there is an archaeological ordinance that the city of Casey has, which is very similar to the federal laws in terms of taking away unauthorized removal and disturbance. So we have similar safeguards in the park.
Awesome. Yes, I was going to ask if you guys had like local ones. I couldn't find anything in my searches, but I was sure there was something out there. And then another one that we follow very, very, very closely is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. And so if we are doing any kind of archaeology at the park at Congaree, for instance, and we come upon a burial, we come upon a Native American grave site, we stop immediately. We do not continue. And we have an agreement in place. We actually consulted with a number of the tribes whose ancestors would have been the ones living in the park. And, we will consult with them, and they will come out to take care of their ancestor. They will, we've set aside a specific place. It's confidential. Nobody knows where it is except for a very few, and they will take it to that location, or they'll leave it in situ. They'll leave it there to remain in that spot. But we will not do anything without consulting our tribes, because that is their ancestor. And we wouldn't want someone going into just a graveyard where our ancestors are buried and just like, yeah, I'm going to dig up here and just move, great grandfather someplace else. That would not be something we want to have happen, and it shouldn't be something we do to anybody else. So know those state, local, and federal laws. You do want to respect the cultural significance of certain places. If you follow any of the national park sites on social media, a lot of sites are beginning to put on their sites kind of at the end of a post that the picture was taken on the tribal lands of, and then they will put in the specific tribes who would have once been there. So places have cultural significance, and it's not necessarily something we know immediately because it may be very much hidden. But there are places that are considered sacred, and that includes both Native American burial grounds and sites, and also the cemeteries of enslaved persons from the years before the Civil War. Many of those cemeteries of formerly enslaved people, you don't know they're there. They hide because there's the markers, if there were any markers, were wood, or it was just a stone that the stone's gone, or it just looks unobtrusive. So when we come across those sites, we want to make sure we respect the sanctity and the reverence that goes with that site. I already kind of went over this, but if remains are unearthed, we're going to determine, if it's a Native American burial, we're going to stop all work and consult with the tribes, because consultation is crucial. Disturbing or moving ahead without consultation is never okay. We don't ever want to do that. And so that may happen at the Tulsa History Park. They may be doing archaeology. They may find something. And so if that happens, they're probably going to stop work so that they can determine what's going on. And even if they do, if you find a skeleton, they'll probably call in the sheriff's office first, determine and make sure if it's historic or recent. But archaeologists tend to be, fairly well experienced in hopefully being able to tell it's like those are really old bones, not something that has been there for just about maybe a few months or less than 100 years. So we want to make sure we respect the cultural significance of a place. So during our interpretive programs, we may be able to use artifacts. Artifacts are a great resource. So they're a great way to help the audience actually engage with your topic. And so certain artifacts that, you may see used in interpretive programs are things like pottery sherds. You might find programs for lithic artifacts such as projectile points, or tools such as axes or hide scrapers, things like that are used. And then musket balls or cannon shrapnel, the remains of shell fragments. Those might also be things that you see used in programs. Make sure that, if you are using any kind of artifacts, it is okay to use that artifact. We do have some pottery sherds at Congaree that, unfortunately, they were found on in places like the sandbars down on the river, and they got brought into us in the visitor center. And at that point, they have lost any kind of site context whatsoever. They would have had very little as it was being on a sandbar. That's most likely not where it originally was. It was probably washed downstream, but we still want to know where it was found exactly so that, it can be cataloged properly. So we have a couple pieces like that, because they were removed, they're no longer in situ. We can't put it back where it was. They have been cataloged and are now used as interpretive pieces. But make sure you can use them. Make sure they don't have any, cultural significance attached to them. Pottery pieces might be parts of burial urns, and you don't want to be, displaying a burial urn for everyone to see, because if somebody comes in and they recognize what that is, and they're part of one of the tribes that is the part, maybe one of their ancestors, that would be not okay. So always make sure your artifacts are okay to display. And it's okay to use replicas too. It's okay to use a replica lithic point. It's okay to use a reproduction mini ball or cannon shell or cannonball, things like that. It's not an original, but it's still an artifact, and it still is representing things that you might find. So here are just some of the artifacts. I'm sure you guys have probably seen these already. Just some of the things that have been found at Fort Congaree during their excavations. So you don't have to have the actual artifact, by the way, to display it. You can have a picture of it. That is perfectly fine. You're still seeing it. You're just not able to physically touch that artifact. And some of the things you find are so cool. I mean, the remains of an 18th century hand grenade, that's pretty awesome. Finding a piece of basically, fake jewelry, a paste jewel with a ship impression, people will see that and it's like, wow, that stuff still, remained over 200 years later. Beads and the remains of bottles, and finding things, go back, such as pipe stems and pipe bowls with the maker's marks still on them. Finding a seal from somebody who was there probably in the mid 1700s, perhaps carried by a Scottish Jacobite. I don't know how many of you have watched Outlander or know about the Jacobite rebellions of the early to mid 1700s, but that's a really important time, and to know that this person had a connection to that movement. A porcelain scraper used to scrape hides. I kind of, when I saw that, I kind of wondered, like, who used that? Was that something that a Native American was using instead of using a piece of stone? Porcelain works just as well, and so they utilized that. Or was it something that maybe one of the European settlers and traders there was using to scrape hides? Who knows? Maybe someone does. I unfortunately don't at the moment, but maybe someone does. And then when we have all of those Native American artifacts that come up, they tell us so much, and they give us a connection to those ancient peoples who were living here thousands and thousands of years ago. So when you find artifacts that are, either pre-Clovis or, from that Paleo-Indian era, you can show people, what their tools look like. You can show them what kind of materials they were using. And then if you're showing specifically like lithic points, you see how they develop over time. You can go from the Paleo-Indian to the Archaic, and you show how, you can show how their culture developed, how they technologically developed, how they went from being hunter-gatherers, very mobile, nomadic, to starting to begin settling down in one place for longer periods of time, actually building structures, to the woodland era, where their pottery is becoming much more sophisticated, more decorative. They're building villages that actually have protective wall around them. And then eventually getting all the way up to that Mississippian era, where you have a culture that is growing similar to what you would find down in Mesoamerica, down in the Aztec, Olmec, Maya cultures. So it's growing close to those cultures that we are much more familiar with, but they hadn't technologically advanced to the same point. They were still building mounds out of earth, not stone temples. But they had a more structured society, and you can show people all of those things. You can use to explain them through artifacts, through archaeology. Archaeology has given us all this information because none of these people left us any written records. They did not leave us behind any books, any tablets, anything to actually say, hey, this is what I did in my day-to-day life. We have to extrapolate every bit of that from the artifacts that have been left behind. The same is for what we find in relation to the Battle of Congaree Creek. So you'll find shell fragments. You'll find mini balls, both fired and dropped. Sometimes you can even find the full cartridge of some of the repeating weapons. They are still there. You still find them, and that wasn't fired because it's still in the cartridge. So all of these things that we can find are great ways to actually help us connect with our visitors. Something that I've used archaeology in programs in the past and seen how important archaeology is. So the first park I ever worked at was Fort Raleigh National Historic Site up in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Fort Raleigh. I'm sure John has. But Fort Raleigh is the site of the lost colony. It's where English settlers in the late 1580s came and tried to, they attempted to settle in the colony of Virginia for the first time. Because of the lost colony, obviously it didn't succeed. But that has been a mystery for hundreds of years. What happened to them? Where did they go? And archaeology has been helping us over the years to learn more about what happened to that colony. If you ever go to Fort Raleigh, you'll see there's an earthworks that is there. It's a reconstruction on the site of an original earthwork, but it's not Fort Raleigh. It's too small. And so archaeology has helped the Park Service in the close to 100 years that park has been around, is helped to learn more about that site. One of the more interesting stories from when I was there was there is a play that is put on every year. There are actors that come in. They're typically students from schools or people who are just trying to kind of, you know, get their foot in the door and progress in the acting career. And they live out there for the summer. And they were out in Roanoke Sound, just kind of playing in the water, in the shallow water there. And one of them they cut themselves. They got this really deep gash on their foot. And so while one of the people who was with them was helping to take care of that, the other one went out to find out what the heck was it that cut them. And so they were standing in that area and they were kind of brushing away some of the sand, and what they found under the sand, under the water, was what looked like an axe head. And so they realized, you know, this could be something very historical. So they stopped, they kind of put a stick in it and marked it, and they went and got the Park Service. And the Park Service came out and a 16th century axe head. It's from the 1500s, which is when that colony was. And so they went out and they started doing archaeology, so underwater archaeology. And not only did they find, they recovered that axe head, they found what's called a barrel well. This was basically a long barrel tube that had been put down in the ground to protect a water source. And we have from documents left behind, descriptions of the colony, there was a barrel well. And so they had found what potentially was a remnant of the site. And it told us that it's possible that Fort Raleigh is now underwater. But that still hadn't described what happened to the colonists. And they've been looking for years and trying to figure it out. And so one thing that they have been doing is they have actually been searching for locations they might have gone to. And these artifacts on the screen here, these come from a place called Site X, which is in Bertie County, North Carolina. It's just up the, I think it's the Albemarle River that goes into North Carolina from the Sound. And so what led them to these artifacts was a map. So this is a map that was done by John White. He was one of the people who went in the second expedition in I think he was on all three expeditions, but he drew this map in 1585 of the area around Roanoke. And if you look over on, hopefully my mouse is kind of circling around it, you see this little spot where there's a ship over here where the river splits, and you see right on here, there's this kind of like little patchy area. And it was very common that if a mistake was made on a map like this, it was made on vellum, they would just patch it over. They'd put something over it to like, oh, no, we don't want that there. But nobody knew what was under it. And if they took it, it would possibly ruin the map. But we have technology now that allows us to see what's under that. And so they did some scanning. And what they found underneath that patch was what looks like the symbol of a fort. And so they weren't quite sure exactly what this was. They know that in the 1585 expedition that the men on that expedition went upriver. It's possible they built a fort up there. And so they went to find that spot. And they began excavating there. And what they found are artifacts that link back to the 16th century. These were very similar artifacts to what had been found at places like Fort Raleigh and other early colonial sites. And so it's leading them to, you know, hopefully maybe one day be able to say, this is a location that some of the lost colonists went to. It's not agreed that they all went in the same spot. It's thought that maybe some of them went other places. Down at near Hatteras, the lighthouse in the town of Buxton, they've been doing other excavations that have found other artifacts from that same period. That is where the Native American tribe that had befriended those colonists lived. So it's possible some of them went there. It's possible some went up to the area near where is now Jamestown. They might have all split up. But archaeology is helping us to maybe finally one day be able to answer the question of what happened to the lost colonists. And that's why archaeology is so important in interpretation, because it helps us fill in the gaps for the audience as well. So as interpreters, archaeology is going to be a really big resource for you. If there are archaeological reports that you have access to, read them, take a look, get in there and see what details you can extrapolate. Most archaeological reports will have a kind of a background summary of everything going on. It's not all just scientific data. So use those resources to help you in your interpretation. So other things you might find helpful are wayside exhibits. So these are some of the wayside exhibits that are coming in to the 12,000 History Park. So these are related to the Civil War. So we've got one about artillery, and we've got one about, my computer's taking forever, and one about archaeology. My computer's running slow, unfortunately. Those are kind of half there, half not. But you can see where things have been found. I think I might have frozen.
There it is.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we see it now.
Okay, all right. It's catching up. There we go. All right, awesome. So there are wayside exhibits also that will help the audience to understand more about archaeology and see some of the artifacts as well. So utilize these in your interpretation. They can be good stopping points, and they're good places to direct visitors to. Mm-hmm. So with that, I want to open things up to any questions. If anybody has any questions, you can either you can share them on the you can shout them out loud, or there is a chat function as well. You can also send them to me via chat as well. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they would like to ask?
John, I have a softball.
Go for it.
I understand there are lots of methods of determining the age of artifacts that are hundreds of thousands and millions of years old. Mm-hmm. Up in the Manning site, I guess is where they find a lot of these points that go back to 12,000 years. How do we know one is 3,000 years old and one is 4,000 years old and one is 7,000 years old?
So like you said, there are different methods for determining certain artifacts, and different artifacts need different types of dating methods. One that used to be really popular is one that was called carbon-14. It was measuring the decay in carbon in biological matter. It was an older method. Are they still using carbon-14, John, or has that kind of been, pushed aside to more modern ways of dating carbon?
Yeah, they're still using it. It's one of the what they call absolute dating techniques that are based on scientific observations of physical phenomena, and then there are contextual or relative dating techniques which take into account the depositional layers, the artifacts associated with each layer.
Right. And then there was one I was actually reading about it just yesterday when I was kind of looking stuff up on the Topper site. It was, John, you can probably give me the full name because I can't remember. Optical. It was like optical. It was basically, it was. I have to look up the exact terminology for it, but it's how they were dating some of the stone artifacts. And you have other things that can also measure the amount of decay in other isotopes within artifacts. So there are actually a number of ways that you can date artifacts, but you know, one of the ways that you can also do it is you can get kind of a general idea just on kind of the geological layers that you're digging into. Different layers of earth were going to be deposited at different times. So they can see when they can determine whether something was deposited within the past, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 50,000 years. So it's also knowing a bit about geology, knowing the different geologic formations and layers within an area, especially as you go deeper down. Places like, Fort Congaree, within the past 200 years, you might not be getting deep into those geologic time because you're only going back 250, 300 years. But for stuff like Clovis and pre-Clovis, yeah, they're going to look at, what layer it is in the soil because it's going to be buried under a lot.
Do we know what methods they actually used in the Manning site, or just a variety?
Gary, they used radiocarbon dating. That was, most of that excavation was done, 20, 30 years ago. Some of it a little more recent. But a lot of these dates are derived from relative dating, where they date the carbon remains like charcoal from a particular depositional layer. And then if you find an artifact in that layer, you're assuming that it was deposited at that time. So that's how they bring in the dating of the artifacts. Very rarely can you do analysis on an actual artifact and come up with a date unless it's composed of some material that was deposited at a certain time. So it's a relative dating technique mostly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's like, and they will never say that something is this old. You will see, they will say it is between this date, it is between this many years old and this many years old, especially something that's going back thousands of years, because it's not going to, you cannot say, unfortunately, with absolute certainty how old something is all the time. So, I mean, things like, if you find a mini ball at in the earthworks, you can probably say with pretty good certainty that was fired in 1865. It is 155 years old. That wouldn't be hard to say. But if you find, a lithic point down in a layer that would have been, that matches where other lithic points of Clovis era are, you would say it's going to be between X amount of years and X amount of years, because you're not going to try and, you can't always get everything with certainty. So yeah, that's why we'll use between 13,000. You might see BC, BCE, BP. Those are the different ways of denoting before the Common Era. Between 13,000 and 10,000 BP, for example. So, but yeah, there are so many dating dating methods, and if you look at a archaeological report, if they've done dating, it'll tell you what they use.
Okay, I want to put my input in here.
Go for it, DC.
John, I appreciate you pointing out the hayals over there in Hawaii. I've actually seen that particular one you mentioned from a distance. There's one I walked around, took some photographs of on Oahu when we was over there in July on the northern shore of Oahu. And you're correct, they are sacred sites. That particular hayal had an altar by the entrance, and there was pieces of fruit and stuff like that left on it. And, you know, we don't mess with anything, but I took pictures and all. I didn't, you know, there was no harm in that. But y'all are probably going to disagree with me, and that's okay. But I don't like the attitude I'm seeing here toward relic collectors. And on a personal note here, if it wasn't for my dad bringing me a box of arrowheads from a friend of his years ago that collected artifacts, don't ask me how he got them. I don't know. And if it wasn't for me and my dad going into fields, we had permission to hunt relics, and I wouldn't be at where I'm at now. I would not have studied archaeology. I would have not have studied history. I would not be doing this historical interpretation. I would not be making replica Native American weaponry. Okay.
Yeah.
So please, y'all don't write off every artifact collector, every relic hunter is some kind of wicked, evil, heinous person that's up to no good. There are a lot of people I know that study and document because they found that thing. They're like, what is this? I want to know more. I want to know how it was used, and so on and so forth. And that's how it got me going. And on our Granby dig, when we're out there digging in the front yard where David Nodess owned that property, we have people come by very curious, wanting to know what we're doing, why we're doing it, what's going on. And we've had a number of them. We invite them to sift through the sifter screen, or to help, you know, dig shovelfuls of soil into the sifting screens. And a lot of times we'll hear them say, I want to learn more about archaeology. I want to learn more about history. And so from those perspectives, I think relic hunting, or just curiosity about relics, is a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
We were down at Hunting Island this weekend, a beautiful place. And I hauled off my metal detector down there, but I never did use it because you can't get around the lighthouse with one of those things. And I understand that. I wanted to relic hunt behind the store and back beyond the campground just to find coins and jewelry and bracelets and stuff people left behind. But I chose not to do it because I didn't know what I might run into. And that aspect of the state parks kind of annoy me, because if you get in an area where there's not historical archaeological sites, then what's the big deal? Yeah, if somebody finds something, they need to report it if it's archaeological significance. But if you don't have people doing that, then some of this stuff may go unknown, if you know what I mean. So part for defending the collectors, but that's how I got started in this stuff, okay? And I know others started in this stuff like this. And on that note, if we ever do have a dig again out at Congaree Historical Park, if it can be done, let's invite the public to come out there and within reason participate, because you don't know where that might lead. That might get somebody else doing what you're doing as a ranger, or being a tour guide for us, or something of that nature. You just don't know. And I think it'd be a good thing.
DC, that is the original idea of the park, is having kind of a laboratory of archaeologists and historians working out there and having public participation. It hasn't worked out yet, but we're still trying to convince the university to have field schools out there, and we're always open to proposals to do research out there. So we're hoping that that can happen.
I know.
I'd like to mention that most archaeologists that I know have a very close relationship with amateur collectors. And you're right, the collectors know where the sites are. The collectors help the archaeologists locate sites, but also in collecting artifacts. And I've been involved in many projects where we work with the amateurs. We have an understanding about what's going to happen when something is found. And sometimes sometimes agreements can be made where certain artifacts are not vital that people can keep, but that depends on the rules of that particular site.
Well, I understand that. And, you know, back when I got started with this, I had permission to be on a site there near where I lived in Alabama. And it used to be a mound site. And I think it had 3 or 4 mounds. One of them was destroyed by farming, which, you know, don't get me started on that stuff either. The other 2 were destroyed by flooding of the small creek there, or medium-sized creek. The Temple Mound was pot hunted, and that always bothered me. And I tried to get local archaeologists and historians to go out there and excavate the thing, but nobody wanted to fool with it. And yet they would sit there and fuss and complain about people relic hunting and robbing the mound. And I'm thinking, why don't y'all do your part? And that would resolve part of the problem. But I understand there's finances involved and paperwork and all this other kind of stuff to get that stuff going. And unfortunately, I know there are bad relic collectors out there, don't get me wrong, but we're losing a lot, not just the flooding and Walmart building buildings on sacred sites and farming and whatnot, and highway development, and all that, but we need to do as much as we can. And I remember my archaeology professor teaching us that whenever you get a hold of a relic, he was a artifact collector friendly. He said, whenever you get a hold of something, whether it's from a show, like a flea market or something, whether it's something you find, document. And even to this day, whether I get a hold of a bayonet, an old sword, a musket ball or something, I do my best with whatever kind of information I can get about it to document. That way, that goes forward in the future. If I pass it on to somebody else, or I pass away, there are those records for whatever the necessary means might be. And that he pounded in our head. I've never forgotten that.
Right, that's very important. One option that you could consider if you find an archaeological site that you're having frustration getting a university or museum to send someone out is to contact the Archaeological Society of South Carolina, where James Stewart and Ashley McIntyre and several people belong. I don't know, you may belong to that, but they can propose, gathering the resources to do something like that, depending on the situation. But they're one resource you can call on.
I'm aware of that for here. I don't know of as many sites here in South Carolina. Back where I'm from, I knew more places. That one particular site called Pate's Landing, it was very sad and disturbing seeing what was happening to the remaining mound. And as far as I know to this day, nothing had been done to it. And granted, it would have been salvage archaeological work, but at least it would have been archaeological work, and that whatever was recovered would have been documented and hopefully put on display in a local museum maybe. But
you're right that the professional community has to work harder to assist and come in on these situations. If they can't themselves, they call their colleagues or other people interested in preservation and get them out there. So you're right. It's a lot of things have been allowed to happen that should not have happened.
Yeah.
I understand that.
I do
wonder if
go ahead.
If our has something that I walked off my back deck the other day around twilight, and I happened to look down at where the bottom step hits the ground. There was an arrowhead sitting there, and I'm thinking, how'd that get there? It wasn't something that I brought into the yard. And I'm thinking maybe our house, because we're between Congress Creek and 6 Mile Creek, the house might actually be sitting on a little campsite or a flint knapping site or something like that. And if somebody ever wants to come over and excavate in our yard, I'll let you. I mean, who knows what's sitting here? So
Yeah.
It's raise it a little like it happen, you know.
And I don't want you to, I'm not trying to, I as a young boy living out in central Ohio, like I went out in local fields for the farmers I knew and walked around with my uncle and my mother's stepfather, and we went and looked for arrowheads all the time, and we found stuff, and it was really cool. And
yeah,
we had relationships with them, and we knew those people, and we were allowed to do that. Just like, what, our, as at least as the Park Service philosophy is, and I'm sure the state parks philosophy is as well, is because those are public lands and they belong to everybody, everything within those lands also belongs to everybody. And especially when it comes to, lithic points and pottery sherds and things like that, we just want to make sure that those artifacts are there for everyone to understand, can gain an understanding of it. But I know a lot of people, we have actually one of our volunteers at the park, he actually works with, I can't remember the organization itself, but basically, South Carolina had so many Revolutionary War battles, skirmishes, battles everywhere, encampments all over the place. And they want to be able to document those and find those.
Right.
And so one that he got sent on recently, they were trying to find the site of Tar Bluff. And Tar Bluff is where John Lawrence of Hamilton fame now, that's where he was killed. And
right.
So nobody knew exactly where that had occurred. They knew the general area, they knew where Tar Bluff was, but where did the action happen? And so he and a number of other people who had, permission to go on that property because it was private property, and were working with the with an organization trying to actually locate and document those. They went out with their metal detectors and they documented. So they would they'd get a beep, they would kind of get down there, find what it is, they'd flag it, they'd mark it, and they were doing everything under a protocol. And that's perfectly fine. And if people are doing that on someone's private property and they have permission to do it, that's perfectly fine. It's when it becomes, like you said, people who have a more nefarious, a more nefarious motive behind it, because you will find people who are pot hunters and they're going out and they want to dig those things up and they want to sell them because they know they can make money off of them. Going out to places like Congaree Creek and digging into the earthworks to find, not because they want them, but because they want to sell them, or maybe they want to keep them, but then you have to look at how does that degrade a site that is for the public now. Yep. So it's not saying that people who go out and look for those things are awful, horrible people, because every one of us has probably gone out at one point in our lifetimes and been looking for things or found something and it was really, really, really cool. It's just when that might potentially begin degrading a site, or it's when someone finds something and maybe they're thinking, well, this could be significant, but hey, who the heck cares? I'm just going to take it with me anyway. And then we as a collective, group of people who, really love history or are learning about culture, then we lose it. And so I had a young boy and his family come out to the park. It was sometime early this year, and metal detectors you can't have metal detectors in national park. It's one of those regulations we have. And I heard about someone with a metal detector. I went out, I contacted him, and we had a talk. I didn't berate the kid, because he very well was excited about, history. He could be a future archaeologist one day. And I don't want to, ruin that and put him off of that. But I also explained, everything we find here, this belongs to, it belongs to everybody. It's a public place. And so we just want to make sure we're protecting it for everybody, because you never know what you might find might actually have some significance. And if you pull it up, we might actually lose a lot of that information. I use it as an interpretive teaching moment. And hopefully that young boy is going to still one day want to still go out and look for things and get permission to go and look on places. And I have no issue with that whatsoever. People who go looking for relics are very much like us birders. you know, I did a birding program with John the past couple, yesterday and last week, and ornithologists, they can't do everything they need to do to learn about bird migration patterns and everything. But when you get citizen scientists out there who are, you know, doing that work and recording it, it helps them. And people who are looking for relics, they stumble upon something, and hopefully they're like you, DC, who is much more on the side of, hey, this looks really important. I'm actually not going to touch that. I'm going to report this to somebody because I think this is more than just a little prolific point that's just out here. So,
well, y'all don't
great service, but you know, I'm not trying to disparage them. So I'm sorry if you felt that way.
Yeah, well, don't worry about, as far as me metal detecting and artifact hunting. I've never come across any burial. I've never found any like artifact metal detecting. It's top nails and rings and coins, stuff like that, you know.
Right.
Again, I'm very heavy and to emphasize this when I talk about it. Document. Better to find and recover and document lost in a river or paved over by asphalt or something and lost forever, you know. So I have a slightly different perspective. I understand yours. I don't disagree with it as far as state parks and stuff and national parks go, but we got to have a compromise somewhere. And I think I agree with you. Most of the people that have gotten into this, it's been because of an artifact, movie, or a book, or a museum, or something like that, you know. So
it's teaching responsibility. It's teaching responsibly doing things. That's where the real crux lies. Are we doing it responsibly? Do we have permission to do it? You know, like I said, the South Carolina law, that actually falls under trespass law. That's where that law is written. It's not under a specific, law about archaeology. It is under trespass law. So it's trying to say, if you know there's a site someplace, don't just wander onto somebody's property to go looking for stuff. If you have permission, that's fine.
Permission.
Just don't go trespassing on places to do that.
Right. If you can find where you get permission. Sometimes it's not that easy to do, but you have a field out in the middle of the boondocks somewhere, and you don't know who owns it, so you got to poke around or something, But I know of some places not too far from here that supposedly have some Native American sites on it, but I don't know who to talk to about them, so I'll leave it be. It could be historically significant, but until we know who owns that property, and I say that based on the location, it may not be anything there, but I'm just, it looks promising, but I've taken pictures of it, but I have from the entrance, but I haven't messed with it, and the other people didn't mess with it either, but we all came to the same agreement. There's probably something there. And maybe one day if we can get permission, we can investigate and see, hey, is this worth reporting or not,
Yeah. I mean, the Topper site was excavated by Dr. Al Goodyear, but he wouldn't have known about it unless a local man by the name of Topper had come to him and said, hey, I found all this stuff here. I think you should come take a look at it. And so he did that. And that has led us to 36 years of really amazing data. So it's just normal people out there who either just stumble upon it or they're looking for something and they realize I found something a lot more than just a couple pottery sherds or lithic points. So yeah, we just want people to do it responsibly, do it correctly. And, like we tell people, if they find something at the park, come tell us. Leave it where it is, but come tell us. And then we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that, it's protected and documented and everything so that, and I would even take a picture of a person and say, hey, this person found a really cool, site with some really cool archaeological, artifacts. We're really glad they came and talked to us and let us know where it was so we could learn more about it, so.
Don't get me wrong or anything. That's not how I meant that. And I remember when I did interpretation down at Fort Morgan, Alabama for a summer, the head park ranger there, who was also an archaeologist, said, if you find an artifact on the grounds, bring it to me, let me see it. If we've already got an example of it, you can keep it, And I always thought that was pretty cool, And that's another thing that got me headed off into the war between the states. history and stuff too by being there and doing. I never found anything. Saying that was his attitude. I always thought that was a little bit different, but they knew they had a bunch of stuff already, you know, and it was interesting how that went. And if you ever study up on Fort Morgan, it's got a lot of history and stuff. It is a really neat place. And the developers down there have been itching for decades to get in there in that area and just tear the fort down and develop it into condos or something. So again, area, don't get me started on, you know.
Yeah. So it's you know, I think you know, interpreting archaeology really, you know, it serves a couple purposes. Number one, it could, you know, is help people understand the site too. But number two, you know, it creates the next John Jameson. You know, it creates new archaeologists out of young people who see these things. It's like, really, that would be interesting. I always thought about being an archaeologist. It was one of the things I thought about when I was trying to figure out, you know, what I want to do as a career. But, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can be involved in that, and interpretation is one of them. So
one thing about archaeology that bugs me here, literally in South Carolina, is this is mosquito central, and I hate them things.
Oh, yeah.
I kid around with my wife sometimes. I need to contact the state representatives and see if the mosquito named the official state insect, you know, but you know, but any
state bird, but any other questions, anything anybody has to Nelson? Nelson's been in, but he's on mute, so I don't know if he has a question. He can unmute, but I just want to, you know, we've been recording, so hopefully this will be a good training resource for other volunteers who weren't able to join in. And if anybody has questions, John, you've got my email address, and people are more than welcome to send me an email if they've got any questions.
Okay. DC, I want to say a lot of things you were saying are good points. Both sides, the professional community, the amateur community, need to communicate and work together. You know, that's the way we're going to protect things. And sometimes the archaeologists are a little bit ivory tower. Sometimes they're possessive and overly critical, but that they're human. So I think it's just a matter of communication, and we're all after the same thing. We all want to preserve, protect, and help the public understand and benefit from these resources.
Well, like I said, I found that arrowhead here in the backyard. Maybe we ought to put a test pit in sometime.
I think that's a possibility, but you might call that to the attention of the Amateur Society. Maybe they can send a crew over there at some point. There's Nelson. He's
Nelson
decided to appear, show himself.
Hey, gents, I've been enjoying the discussion, and don't have anything to add or any serious questions, but certainly appreciate the points that y'all have made.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining in, Nelson. Glad to have you with us.
I wanted to, before we sign off,
I need to go.
Thank you.
Suggest we're going to have our next public Zoom is by Brent Bergen, who's from the South Carolina State Native American Archive, University at USC Lancaster, next on November 5th, Thursday. He's going to be talking about that resource and how maybe we at the 12,000 Year Park can benefit from having access to that resource and just learning about that resource. I don't think it's very well known. So I would be looking forward to everybody tuning in next Thursday morning at 10 for that.
Let me inject in here that I've seen that center. That is a excellent center. If nobody has seen it, and they need to get up there and check it out. It's well worth the time and the effort. It's really nice. It's really well done.
Well, I think the whole facility there at USC Lancaster is not known well enough. So hopefully we can have people on and get the word out there, and then that'll help us know about that resource and use that to interpret things in the park.
Yeah. Is that next Thursday you said, John?
Yes, next Thursday, November 5th at 10. Brent Bergen. He heads that. He's in charge of that archive, Native American archive.
Okay.
Awesome.
I got
Right.
some calls.
Yeah, I gotta run
Thanks so
too,
much,
folks.
John. It's great.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Nelson, for joining in, and everybody else. This is recorded, so we're going to be posting it for other people to use. And take care.
Yeah, everyone have a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.